Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liz Charnetsky. I'm a faculty scientist at Maine Health Institute for Research, and I am so pleased you're all joining us here for our final seminar session. And we are joined here by Dr. Ellie Donath, who's going to speak to us about ChatGPT, a friend, a foe, or tip of the iceberg. Dr. Donath is an assistant professor in the Division of Hospital Medicine, Department of Medicine, University of Vermont Larner College of Medicine. He specializes in internal medicine and machine learning, including recent work on a natural languages process pipeline to automatically predict human behavioral responses to viral epidemics like Ebola. He's developed a niche in deployment of large language models towards usage in healthcare, and we're so happy you're here to join us. I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Don.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here. Uh, okay. You guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about LLMs and healthcare. And the way I kind of structured this presentation is I'm going to spend the first third or so talking about how LLMs work. The second third, sort of a little bit about different applications of LLMs in healthcare. And then third section on just the limitations of LLMs and the various things to be aware of. The more they sort of ensconce our lives and different things to think about. Um, so I thought I would start it with just this is Alan Turing, most believe the father of AI. He came up with this line about 75, 80 years ago, and it seems like kind of somewhat close to being true in the not too distant future. Um, so just a little bit about myself. I don't know if there's any conventional route to gaining some level of expertise in AI-based methods. There's no like residency or fellowship or PhD program dedicated to this. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. The way I did it is I got an MPH in biostats and then did a couple of consulting gigs after that, where I just was involved in teams that were developing prediction models. And a big part of that was sort of incorporating unstructured free text into that. And that got me interested in LLMs, kind of using LLMs to kind of digest large amounts of text. And that's sort of how this my interest came to be, and now I'm sort of working at UVM and trying to get some grants. We got some already, trying to get a few more, and doing various research in LLM applications in healthcare. This is just a personal example how I initially got interested in it. I worked for this startup company called Claire Medical. They provide in-home care to very at-risk elderly patients. They were really interested in kind of trying to predict patients' risk of hospital admissions. That's where a lot of the costs are born and kind of patients needing to go to the hospital. And so we consolidated a wide variety of variables, mostly conventional tabular data, but we also came up with the idea, let's also interrogate unstructured free text provider notes. For the most part, um, this is a huge component of kind of the data that is inside of EMRs about patients, and a lot of it is not being properly harnessed or interrogated. So we kind of got really interested in that, and that also got me really interested in LLMs. So just to kind of now sort through kind of the space ChatGPT was launched on November 30th, 2022, and this whole environment, this whole world has come up since then. Um, ChatGPT is the fastest growing app in the history of web apps. This is a slide from that article. Kind of just shows how quickly the uptake is and how interested people are in this thing. I thought this was cool because NVIDIA makes GPUs. They sort of power LLMs and a lot of AI, and you could see around Q4 of 2022, Q1 2023, the revenue really starts just skyrocketing. And this is revenue per quarter. So it was started at around 5 billion a few quarters ago. Now it's up to 20 billion. So just to give you a sense, this thing is really powerful, and a lot of people are really interested in using it. And as it pertains to healthcare, a lot of us have started speculating the various ways it might help us or maybe be better than us at certain things. And so there's been a lot of speculation. Is it better than us at board exams? This is the most recent data from GPT-4, and pretty clearly it's pretty good at board exams, and it's getting better pretty fast. Does it have better bedside manners than us? That's also up for debate. Will it replace us? That's something that's being talked about as well. I don't think so, but some people are speculating. Let's start from the basics. So what is a language model? Uh, in essence, there's two ways to define it. One is it's the probability of a sentence or sequence of words. So if you were going to say a phrase, what's the higher probability phrase? So you could say I flew to a movie. That is a proper phrase to say, but it's much more likely you were going to say I drove to a movie. And when you're dealing with audio, transcription of a file, eyes of an is much less likely than I saw a van. So that's kind of one way to think about it. Another way is what's the probability of an upcoming word. So if you have there's a combination of words leading up to the given word. What's the most likely next word given the whole prior combination of words? So if you were going to say the students opened there, what's the most likely next word? It's books is much more likely than zoo as the next word. And and I should say this is a conditional probability statement. Just going back to your high school statistics, the part before that horizontal uh, or the part after that sort of vertical line is what's the thing leading up to the next thing, and the part after that vertical line is kind of uh, is the suffix, what we would expect to happen as a result of those prior things, or the probability of event given the prior events. Um, this is just to give you an example of that. So like it calculates a probability distribution over the next word. So students open there, books is pretty high probability, laptops is somewhat high probability, zoo and are pretty low probability words. And this is sort of an example of a tiny language model. So let's say you wanted to build a language model of just three sentences. I am Sam, Sam I am, I do not like green eggs and ham. And you wanted to kind of calculate the probabilities of certain word combinations. Um, and I should say the S with two arrows is the beginning of a sentence, and the S with two arrows and a backslash before it is the end of a sentence. And so, in this case, if you were going to start a sentence, you have that S with two arrows here. What's the probability of the first word of a sentence being I? And you can see over here, it's 2 out of 3. 2 out of the 3 sentences start with I. As another example, if you have the word Sam in a sentence, what's the probability that now you're going to be ending the sentence? That's 1 out of 2 because we have Sam here twice, and 1 out of those 2 times we end the sentence with Sam. And just to kind of fill you in on these, so let's say if you were going to start a sentence, what's the probability of the first word in that sentence being Sam? That's 1 out of 3 because we're starting 3 sentences here, and 1 of those 3 times Sam is there. And what's the conditional probability of this next one? So if you have the word am in a sentence, am appears twice in these 3 sentences. And one time it's followed by Sam, the other time it's not. So that'll be 1 out of 2. And that's kind of just how we do this. So if you had a language model of just 3 sentences and you were starting a new sentence, the first word would probably be I based on just this tiny language model. Um, Things start to get a little bigger. This is a language model that was built off Yelp reviews pre 2018. I'm going to talk about why 2018 was important in a second, but this is what I would call a small language model. So the y-axis is kind of the first word, and the x-axis is the second word. And you can see here like the most common word combination in this sort of corpus of Yelp reviews is I want. I is the first part, and then want is the second part. And you can see I followed by other words is pretty uncommon. I too it never happens. I eat happens, 9 times. And through developing this sort of large 2D table of text, you could start coming up with various word combinations that are likely to happen. And this is considered a very, very primitive way to build a language model. This is far outdated, but it's just to kind of give you a sense of kind of how we do this. What happened in 2018 was a paper came out called "Attention is All You Need." In that paper, they discussed the transformer, and they talked about this concept of self-attention. And we're going to talk about both those things. And they really paved the way for LLMs and kind of this whole new world of generative AI. I don't think without this paper, we would be quite where we are today. And I think most people would agree with that. So I think in order to understand LLMs, it's worth trying to understand what GPT means. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. And we're going to go through each of those words and try to understand things a bit. Before I do that, it's worth just recognizing, so what's the history of GPT models? There have been five different versions of GPT. Sorry, four different ones. The fifth one is coming soon. A lot of speculation about how good that might be, but you can see it's kind of growing really fast. The size of it and kind of what it's trained on. Um, things are advancing in the space just ridiculously quickly. Um, and if you're going to think about how smart a GPT model is, I think this is kind of the general convention that GPT-4 is kind of like a smart high schooler, and we'll kind of see where GPT-5 goes. So what does the generative in ChatGPT refer to? Most people would most people would kind of think of AI as kind of a much broader space and then various subspaces within it. And I think generative AI is this small subspace within deep learning. And the best way to think about it is, AI is traditionally used to process information and sort of analyze patterns. Generative AI refers to the idea that we can use these patterns to create brand new things, as a result of all these patterns that have been ingested by the models. What does pre-trained in ChatGPT refer to? Um, so I think a good way to think about it is, let's say you wanted to build a model that would predict a movie review score from, let's say, 1 to 5 based on a whole collection of movie reviews. Let's say you pulled 20,000 movie reviews from IMDb, and you wanted to kind of build a model that would predict what the score is based on those reviews. And the traditional way of doing that is you sort of optimize a model, so in which each word is given a coefficient. So like bad might lead to an average reduction of 2 points in the overall score. Good might be associated with a 2 point increase in the average score, and so on and so on. The problem with that approach is we're literally teaching the English language from scratch, and in so doing, we're sort of having every single word be trained separately. The truth is, there are many similar words that should be kind of that models should kind of understand are somewhat the same thing. And there's no point kind of learning all these words separately. There's a whole other host of issues with that, but I think that's the biggest one, and we'll talk about how we've kind of corrected that. Um, so it's really not a great idea. The solution is you take a large collection of text and you pre-train a model that has some general understanding of human language. And the nice thing is we don't need labeled data for this task. We literally can just you could take any piece of text, you could take a book, you could take the entire internet, and you could kind of dump it into the model and have it sort of learn language through that process of sort of what we call unsupervised pre-training. Um, and the way we kind of do it today is, so you pre-train a large self-supervised model, then you fine-tune it towards your specific task. And that's kind of what LLMs are. LLMs are built off, they're sort of these pre-trained models built off voluminous amounts of text. And then we use them for very fine-tuned cases. And we sort of apply them to very specific cases. And the way you can do that is through prompting, but you can also literally just fine-tune the model itself. Um, and then, so what does the transformer in ChatGPT refer to? It's not this. It's also not this. And this is basically what a transformer is. I'm not going to kind of really go through it in the nitty gritty. There are literally advanced level college classes dedicated to just understanding this thing on its own. But we'll talk about a few parts of it. So one key part to understand is the way it ingests words is it first tokenizes the words, it chops them up in various different ways. It converts those words into embeddings, where it literally converts them into multi-dimensional vectors of numbers. And then it sort of adds a positional piece to those numbers, because the way the place of a word within a sentence is obviously very important. If you say the patient is not dyspneic and doing well, that's very different than saying the patient is dyspneic and not doing well. Where the not is in that sentence changes everything in how you're describing a patient. So obviously positional encoding matters a lot. So there's different ways, there's different rules on how to tokenize. For the most part, these days we tokenize based on subunits of words. The smallest possible way to represent a word is kind of how we try to tokenize. In terms of creating embeddings, the whole point of embeddings is because you give you give the model an understanding of where words are in relation to kind of other words. And so, where would you put the word apple? You'd probably put it around word C. So you would give it the value of in just a two-dimensional space. In reality, these embeddings are multi-dimensional spaces, but in this kind of simple example, the word apple would be given an embedding value of 5 and 5. Or as another example, where would you put the word cow? A cow would, the relationship between puppy to dog is similar to the relationship between calf and cow. And so, cow would be given a value of 3, 4, an embedding value of 3, 4, because that's kind of where it is in relation to all these other words in this cloud. Um, this is just a kind of another example of that. It converts these things into many, many dimensional spaces. And, they're for the most part, it's around a 4096 D space in which these words exist. Um, and then we kind of add positional encodings to it. Like I said, that's another part of this that is really important. So just a quick recap: we chop the words up, we convert those words into numbers, and then we add this positional component to it. And then another important part is kind of this. This is the concept of self-attention. So how do I just told you that every word has its own embedding, and so but different words spelled the exact same way can obviously have different meanings, and like the word interest. How does an embedding know that the word interest is means two very different things depending on depending on how it's used? And so this kind of speaks to the concept of self-attention. The way it learns is by the words that surround the word of interest. And so the model learns eventually that through lots and lots of pre-training that the words no and in are attending to the word interest, and then it sort of develops an understanding that interest is used in that specific way. Whereas in the case of the second sentence, it learns that the words rate and bank attend to the word interest, and it sort of understands what the word is interest through the words that attend to that word, and really the words that surround the word help it understand what the word is. The context is everything. Um, and so just to go back to the transformer, I think you could see that a few of these parts we kind of touched on. You have the inputs. The inputs go to the input embedding, which is what we talked about, and then you add that positional encoding to it, and then you kind of send it through these multi-head attention schemes. I'm not going to really go into it further, but suffice it to say, it has really changed things quite a bit, and I think what makes them powerful is to me, the biggest thing is they parallelize computation. So it used to be that if you wanted to kind of predict a sentence of words, you would literally need to go word by word in the past. So if you wanted to say I want to go to school, you would first predict I is the first word in that sentence. Then you would need to know that I was the first word, and then now you're going to predict the next word, want. And then in order to predict the word after want, you would need to know that I want were the first two words in that sentence to predict the third word. And you would literally need it's sort of this iterative scheme in which you kind of have to know all the prior words to predict the next word. And it can be very slow to do that. And what transformers do is they parallelize that whole process. And so it allows things to move a lot quicker. The other nice thing about them is they can identify these long range dependencies. There are words, that if you're reading a book, they might reference someone in the book who was mentioned a paragraph before. The older models have a hard time realizing what they're referring to. Transformers can ingest a large amount of text at once, and so it has a good understanding of kind of different of relationships between words and text. And so now just that's kind of the end of the part of just explaining how LLMs work. I hope it made some sense. I'm happy to take questions on that later. But so now just to talk about the different ways that LLMs will impact healthcare. I think there are really a lot of different ways potentially. So I think and by the way, that list was not at all comprehensive. These are just kind of the ways that I thought were interesting. Um, so I think traditionally the way we build models in medicine is we rely on tabular data derived from like very traditional data sources. So like we think about continuous variables, we think about categorical variables, and the truth is most data is sitting in sort of free text provider notes that are sitting in EMRs. And a lot of that data really isn't being properly interrogated or understood or incorporated into models. And I think LLMs will kind of help us in a big way in kind of filtering through that. This is a study that came out about 9 to 12 months ago. And were really interested in kind of modeling patient timelines in EHRs by incorporating unstructured text. And it seems to help them a fair amount in kind of adding that piece in. They went through uh, some of their own patient data sets, but they also went through this large Mimic 3 data set, which is a nice freely available data set through that Partners Health in Boston has made available, which has actual unstructured free text in de-identified patient notes. Um, so that's one part. And sort of as we enhance EMRs, I think we're not here yet, but this I think we will get to a place where you can sort of fine tune large language models to specific charts and then start asking it very specific questions. So in this, let's say a given scenario, we need to stop John's Coumadin for a surgical procedure. You could start asking the LM, why is this patient on Coumadin? Has this patient had any prior issues when Coumadin was halted? I want to bridge with Lovenox. Does the patient have any reported side effects with Lovenox? And then I think sort of the next level to that is, you could start asking the LM, when is the most appropriate time to stop Coumadin? Should the patient be bridged? When should we restart the Coumadin? And I think we're sort of getting to a place where this could be reality. Uh, Another thing LLMs are really good at is information retrieval. In this study, they wanted to see how well this sort of associate this LLM associated technology called RAG. RAG is retrieval augmented generation. They wanted to see how well um, how good a job it could do at sort of ingesting large amounts of protocol. So like oncologists often deal with a lot of different protocols. The patient's coming in with like third line endometrial cancer, they failed X and X. What's a good next option? And sort of they have to think about a wide variety of studies and protocols that are out there. And so this looked at how good a job GPT-4 associated with this thing called a RAG was at sort of working through all those guidelines and kind of helping people um, come up with the proper next step in a given treatment paradigm. I don't think this gets talked about that much, but that's kind of a really useful tool for LLMs. Is they're really good at sort of working through large amounts of text and kind of identifying things within that text that are helpful. Another thing LLMs are really good at is language translation. You can kind of see here, how good different kinds of LLMs are at interpreting various languages to other languages. I don't know if this gets talked about that much, but it is a really useful way. If a lot of you, if any of you use Google Translate, you'll see it's getting better almost by the month, and a lot of that is because of the LLMs that are being put into it. And in a way, LLMs were kind of initially developed to help translate. That was a kind of a useful way to train a lot of these models. Another thing that LLMs are good at is easing our documentation burden. I really like this sort of headline from the New York Times from a couple months ago. Uh, there are various ways it can do that. I think documentation and administrative requirements consume a pretty good amount of our workload, and that's a big reason for physician burnout. And what LLMs can do is right now, I think there's two big ways they're kind of impacting that. One is they can automate discharge and transfer summaries, and they can also convert patient-clinician conversations into a structured note. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those. So this was, I mean, as of today, they aren't automating production of discharge and transfer summaries, but there's a lot of work being put in to try to figure out how to do that, and I think that's coming pretty soon. This was an article in Lancet from a few months ago. This is kind of just a really sort of very simple example that they provided where they prompted ChatGPT to write a discharge summary. You can see it does a really good job of it. Of course, the funny thing about ChatGPT is it starts creating all these suppositions about this patient that it really doesn't know anything about, and that's kind of one of the issues I'll talk about with it. This is kind of a version of it essentially hallucinating. I mean, it's saying it's describing all these things about a patient that it doesn't really know to be true at all. Another issue with this, obviously, is you should not use ChatGPT for any sort of patient-related information. Everything you give to ChatGPT is going into the servers of OpenAI, and that information is being harnessed in or used in ways we don't really know. So you should never put any information about any patient data into ChatGPT. Um, and I like this. They say the summary is likely to be accurate for most patients, but they kind of highlight the need for manual checking before finalizing anything. Um, okay, and then this is another important way that LLMs are impacting us. They're converting patient conversations into structured notes. At UVM, I know in some outpatient clinics they're already starting to use it, and supposedly people are starting to get into it and really like it. From what I hear, I've never actually used it myself. I work mostly inpatient. Another thing Another way they're impacting us is just more patient empowerment. Just as an example of that, LLMs can be really good at kind of summarizing large swaths of info and making it understandable to people. If patients understand kind of what their issues are and kind of ask an LLM, you know, they haven't seen their doctor in 3 months and they kind of don't remember that conversation they had, but they're really curious about their CHF and they're wondering why they need to take diuretics, they can ask the LLM that question, and um, the LLM might make suggestions to them that could empower them in kind of how they choose to move forward with managing CHF. Um, it's also really good at improving medical education. And there are I kind of alluded to this earlier, but it happens to be really good at board exams. It can break down very complex topics into sort of a easily digestible, understandable way, and it can help create very interactive and engaging learning simulations. I thought this was kind of interesting. This is a study that OpenAI did on GPT-4 on medical um, question answering from a few months ago. So this is kind of uh, the just a table of kind of how GPT-4 did. You could see GPT-4 does much better than GPT 3.5. Things are really advancing pretty quickly. And one other thing I should say, they use the term zero shot versus five shot. What that basically means is zero shot is when you give no additional training to the model. It's just this is just the sort of most basic model of GPT-4. You start asking it questions, how does it do? Five shot is when you kind of give it a little bit of pre-training. You might feed it some information about, let's say, vascular surgery, if you're asking a vascular surgery question, or you might feed it a bit of information, kind of, prompting it about, telling it you are an experienced vascular surgeon, or kind of feeding it information that might help it answer the question in various ways. So that makes it a little bit better. Um, and I thought this was kind of interesting. We kind of it, in that study they kind of use a very nice example of things GPT-4 can do by sort of probing the question a bit more. So here's an example of a prompt. I think a lot of us are familiar with this. You feed in a whole question to ChatGPT, and it gives a really nice answer. The answer is in the highlighted portion below, um, and that answer is correct. But you can go further. So you can say, you, this is the highlighted part is the output, and now you're inputting the non-highlighted part. The student selects malakoplakia. Please explain to the student your assessment of why this is not correct. And it gives a really nice response. And you can sort of use it to interact with the student, and the student, because the student might have had some preconceived notion about why malakoplakia is the best response here, and you could allow ChatGPT to kind of explain why that is not correct, and kind of sort of further interrogate the student's understanding of this content. Uh, and then you can go even further than that. Why might the student have selected malakoplakia? What findings in this case might have brought that to their attention? And can you share reflections on the reasoning the student did to come up with this answer? And it gives a really nice thought process into how the student was thinking, and kind of maybe different ways that the student's thought process needs to be reconsidered. And then going even further, please explain to the student with care and understanding what the student may have thought. And so, it says, please be encouraging and supportive. And so just taking things even further. And I thought this was really cool. You can also sort of ask a counterfactual. Let's say you wanted acute kidney injury to be the best response here. you can literally ask ChatGPT to change the question itself in order to make uh, AKI the best possible answer. Um, and so, just a summary of accomplishments from this very short clinical vignette. So, ChatGPT accurately diagnoses a clinical situation. It explains the diagnosis. It demonstrates the ability to understand. It personalizes the explanation, and it rewrites the case to create a counterfactual, which is pretty cool. And I think different ways to kind of extend the conventional thinking on ChatGPT, that it's just really good at answering board questions, but you clearly can do more than that, and you could interact with it in all these interesting ways. I think another really useful thing it can do is it can really make anyone a coder. LLMs are trained on various computational languages, and they can be really good at kind of helping you interrogate data sets. So, like if you have a data set that you've developed, I would definitely de-identify that data set before you feed it to ChatGPT. But you could start asking it questions about that data set. Feed the entire CSV file into it, ask it questions, and ChatGPT will either give you answers or they can supply you with code that will help you delve into that data set. Um, and if you have code and you have, like, I know a big issue with some people is they're trained on like Stata or they're trained on SAS. And the truth is a lot of AI is being done in Python or R. And ChatGPT is super useful at translating that language to another language. And so, like, um, if you have this piece of code and you're trying to make sense of it, ChatGPT can be really helpful at understanding it. So now, worth talking about some of the limitations. I think there are many. And this, again, this is not comprehensive. This is just a few of the limitations that I kind of think about. So one big issue is lack of recency. When you start asking ChatGPT questions, a lot of times it won't know answers to more recent events. And it's not really that helpful when you want to know things that happened very recently, which is important for us in research. If you're referring to some research article that just got published a month ago, it's very likely ChatGPT will have no idea what you're referring to. Um, Another thing is hallucinations. This is just the idea that very inaccurate information is invented, and that information was never present in the training set. And there's a lot of research into figuring out why this happens and different ways to mitigate it. And I think eventually we'll kind of get to a point where LLMs will be better at kind of managing that. But for now, they're really not. And I think the worst part is they don't really know when they're wrong, and they don't really at all give you any clue as to what they're saying is kind of mostly made up. And it can be said in very eloquent ways, and so it kind of makes you think it's real when it's actually not. Another big issue is LLM processing is a black box that makes interpretability very challenging. Um, this is a big issue with AI in general. For the most part, we build these very fancy models, and we have very poor insight into kind of why the model is saying one thing versus the other. I think that is a big part of what's challenging with bringing AI into the healthcare spaces. If you have some fancy prediction model and it's telling you patients that are at high risk of decompensating from sepsis, and you tell the physician, we have this patient who has a very high rate of decompensating from sepsis based on this prediction model, but you don't give the physician any understanding why the model is making that determination. Most physicians are going to kind of ignore that because they're going to prefer to rely on their own intuition, especially when they don't really understand why the model is saying what it does. And it's very similarly the case in kind of LLMs. We don't have a good sense of why it's recommending one word versus the other or one thing versus the other. Uh, another important limitation is LLMs are very dependent on the training text used to build them. And I think, a lot of us think if we have the perfect model, that's all we need. But the truth is, that you need good data, you need a good model. The two really go hand in hand. You can't build a good LLM without good training text used to build it. The text that is input into ChatGPT is coming from everywhere. It's coming from all different types of places. We actually don't really, for the most part, really know how OpenAI has chosen what text to use in training ChatGPT. And so you just have to be careful. There might it might be using text that you don't necessarily trust in or believe in. There are very questionable approaches to how makers of LLMs gain access to training data. There's currently a lawsuit where New York Times and I think a couple of other organizations have sued OpenAI because OpenAI is using New York Times articles and kind of building its LLM. And is that fair? Is that legal to actually do? We'll see how that kind of plays out. But for the most part, a lot of these LLMs are built off data that they might not really have proper access to, and you have to be a little careful there. Another big issue is a lot of these LLMs are very biased. They adopt patterns that are present in the language in the stuff they're trained on, and so they will often perpetuate and amplify those biases. I thought this was a cool study that was done about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And what they did is they built a language model from bodies of text written in 1960 versus today. And what they found is that if you build a language model off 1960 era text, it's more likely to refer to different occupations in a masculine form versus a feminine form. It's also they also look at kind of how it relates to patients, and it assumes very different things about anxiety levels, agitation levels, pain thresholds. Um, this I don't know what skin thickness. It's like apparently skin thickness was very important back in the 60s. Kidney function, and it assumes all these different things based purely on the race that is described for a patient. Um, Obviously, another big issue with LLMs is most of them are not HIPAA compliant, so you have to be just really careful with how you use them when it comes to asking questions about patients. Another big issue is there's very little regulatory oversight. The FDA is approving a lot of uh, tools that are based on AI, but uh, for the most part, there is very little rigor in kind of how they decide to approve or deny those tools. And it's just hard to know uh, how much thought the FDA has put into whether this tool is good or not. Because there aren't clearly defined protocols on whether or not to approve various AI tools. Um, and so it's something they're working on, but it's just something to kind of think about. Just because you hear some tool is FDA approved, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most rigorously studied tool out there. Another big issue is they use a lot of energy. This is just kind of from an estimate that I found online. Um, by 2030, they may consume as much energy as we do today, is what some people speculate. They rely on these things called GPUs, which is what NVIDIA makes, which really use quite a bit of energy. And for those that are concerned about the climate, this is also an issue to consider. Another thing to think about is uh, this is beyond the part about limitations. This is just the idea that there are so many different types of LLMs that exist. We often think about ChatGPT as being the one, but the truth is there are many of them. A lot of them are really good. A lot of people think Claude might be the best one. You'll have to ask different people. But another thing to realize is there's the closed source general purpose ones, then there's the open source general purpose ones, and then there's domain specific LLMs. The closed source ones are the ones we don't really have any insights to as to how they work. We can't really interrogate kind of the internal architecture of them. Those are the ones from OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic. There's the open source ones. That's where we can fine tune these. We can adjust the parameters on these internally. We understand how they do what they do to some extent, and those are Llama 3, Falcon, Vicuna. There's a lot of other ones. Those are just some of the ones I mentioned. And then there's very domain specific LLMs. Those are trained specifically on um, medical literature or scientific literature or something very specific to a use case. BioBird and Cybird are two of them. There's a lot. There's a lot of them. If you want to learn more about LLMs, the cool thing is there's so many different tools online that are out there to kind of help you learn about them. These are just three of the ones that I thought were interesting. I don't know if you could see the title here for this one, but this is the first one on your left is Andrej Karpathy. He was the former head of AI at Tesla, and now he just does YouTube videos on building different parts of language models. on Python in a very, very accessible way. Um, so all these different tools are out there. It's pretty, I don't think it's that hard to learn about if you are interested in it. And these are all free also, by the way. And that's really it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donna. We have a couple of questions in the chat and a question in the Q&A as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with the chat and then I'll scoot over to the Q&A. First question in the chat is the version of ChatGPT 4.0 that we have access to still being trained, or was the training completed before its release?
Oh, great question. So there is this concept of there's an acronym called RLHF, and I'm trying to remember what it stands for, but it's the idea that these models are being continuously trained and updated even after they're sent out to the public. Anytime you get an output from ChatGPT, it usually prompts you at the end of that output to give you like a thumbs up or thumbs down. And ChatGPT uses that information to kind of help it understand what is a good response and bad response, and it kind of uses that to properly align they call it alignment of the models to kind of um, help it give more desirable responses to people. So it is constantly being updated even after it's put out there in that kind of way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Second question, in the Q&A, can you briefly comment on the different AI models that learns by imitation the way human babies do, and whether or not it will be incorporated into LLMs or remain completely separate? I've read that these are being used to try to understand how whales communicate, like by trying to translate their clicks into something humans can understand. Maybe not so useful for medical applications, though.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that kind of speaks to the idea of these what we call like multimodal LLMs. That's the idea that where we can incorporate like video and image and kind of how into kind of understanding things. And so like I, we're increasingly getting to a point with ChatGPT, you can do this. I you might need I don't know if the free version offers this, but you can literally input images and video and kind of include that in your question. So, you know, let's say you're looking at a baby and you're trying to understand what a baby might be saying or what a whale might be saying. You can literally just input that audio or that video into ChatGPT and kind of ask it to help you understand that and sort of frame the question however you want. But I think we're kind of getting to that point where everything the way it kind of perceives text is kind of a similar way that it perceives video and images. And we're kind of getting to the place where it can kind of integrate that information, whatever the way it is delivered to ChatGPT, it kind of interprets it and integrates it a similar way. And that's the whole concept of multimodal LLMs. It can understand text the same way it understands images, the same way it understands video and other pieces of information.
Wow. All right.
If that made sense. I don't know.
It definitely, to me, it did. A question
Okay.
asker, if that made sense as well. Um,
Okay.
all right. I think the last question in the chat, and then I can move to people if folks want to raise their hands, is do you think apps like ChatGPT may try to implement measures of hallucination?
Uh, do I think they may try to implement measures of hallucination? Um, I you mean measures to suppress hallucination or um
Jonathan, if you want to go ahead and clarify your question, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like a measure to give the user, like if you're asking ChatGPT for some code and like something to say like warning this might be wrong or something.
hmm,
It's just so confidently wrong
yeah, I
sometimes.
know. No, and that's such a great point. And that's such a big issue. Is it exactly right? It's confident and it's so eloquent in how it's wrong that it's hard to perceive that wrongness. I think everyone realizes it's a major issue. I think it's something they're working on, but as of right now, there is no like alarm bell that goes off on ChatGPT where it will tell you. I'm not totally sure about what I'm saying here. That there's as far as I know, none of them will do that in any way. You could start to understand that they're hallucinating by sort of interrogating them. Like just start asking them follow-up questions, and you'll see the logic start to fray a little bit the more you ask them things. I think that's probably the best way to deal with hallucinations is just start asking follow-up questions. Ask
Mm,
them
okay.
where did you get that information from, and literally look up. Like sometimes they'll give you a footnote, and you could look up that footnote, and it'll be completely bogus. It'll it'll have no bearing in reality. And so you could start that using sort of that line of thought. You could start um, questioning the responses in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gary, go ahead.
Hey, Gary.
Gary, you're muted.
Now I'm
Yay.
unmuted. Okay. What's one of the concerns that the NIH has is utilizing ChatGPT for reviewing grant applications.
Hmm.
They are actually providing warnings to reviewers on a number of the study sections that is under no circumstances allowable.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big issue. There was actually a study that came out last week where they looked at various word combinations that ChatGPT is likely to use and wanted to see whether those word combinations were more present in NIH in more recent NIH applications compared to older NIH applications. And like the number is just has exponentially increased. Like these various word combinations that ChatGPT is known to use is much more commonly found in research applications than it used to be. And so
Yeah.
obviously people are using these quite a bit, and I don't know the right way to kind of police that. I'm sure the NIH has various ideas on how to do that, but it's definitely an issue. No
Yeah,
question.
what's been shared with me is that they're concerned, but they really haven't come up with any defined
Right.
strategy to be able to go ahead and to address it yet.
Right. I think that's a big issue across the board with education in general as well. I think a lot of teachers are struggling with kind of how to determine whether what the student is whether when the student writes an essay, how do you know that that is real versus ChatGPT generated? And I think they
Exactly.
have these like scoring tools that have come up recently that can give the teacher like a score. It can say like this is like an 80% probability of being generated by an LM, but I don't know how that can give the teacher any confidence that you know to actually do anything as a result of that information. I don't know how the teacher can use that information in a positive way necessarily. But yeah. And I will say I kind of sped through the first part. I was trying to stay under an hour, but I might have gone a bit too quickly. So if anyone wants, feel free to email me. Um, I'm happy to discuss any section at greater length if any questions.
This was very, very, very informative.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You have other people in the chat agreeing, very informative and interesting.
Okay, great. Cool.
Any last questions before I turn it back to Sheila to wrap us up? Gloria, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a quick follow-up to the hallucinations. Maybe this is too simplistic, but if you ask ChatGPT, how did you get this answer? Would that kind of resolve? Would that be like a good check for yourself to always confirm it's giving you something real?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Okay.
the danger with that is it might give you a very eloquent response that seems real. I like
Mm,
ask it a few follow-up questions and ask it where it's getting its information from. A lot of times that will really I think be the true revealer of whether or not that's if it's real or not.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Are there other best practices for using these kinds of tools that are being widely circulated or disseminated, given like all of the the things to be keeping in mind? I mean, that seems like a good best practice when you get information to check the sources that ChatGPT or what have you is pulling from. Are there any other kind of things that we should always be doing to responsibly use these kinds of tools?
It's a great question. In my mind, it's kind of like it's a little bit like the Wild Wild West out there. I don't think there are. I think different institutions have different rules. For now, I would just say like just be as careful as possible. Like don't just definitely don't give it any patient information. Um, if it's giving you information, make sure you check and double check whatever it's providing you. Just don't rely too much on it. The way I see AI is uh, as actually unfolding over the next couple of years. I really see it as a tool and like just something that we have at our disposal that can make us better clinicians. But I don't think it will ever replace us because I just think there's so many limitations to acquiring real actual intelligence that it's still lacking. So I would just kind of see it as a tool, something that the same way you see your stethoscope as a tool or your cell phone as a tool. It's just a tool, and it should not actually in any way be the be all end all for kind of how you make decisions.
Any last questions before we wrap it up today? Thank you, Ellie. This was wonderful and shed a lot of light on a sometimes murky topic. So we really appreciate the way this presentation was really clear to me.
Okay,
So
cool.
thank you
Great.
so much.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to.
And thanks for our participants who have joined us. Many of you have come to several of our seminars. We really appreciate your attendance. This is the last one for the spring series. We'll be picking back up in the fall. So from the NNECTR leadership, we'd like to extend you a happy summer and we'll see you in the fall. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.